appreciate for highly appreciate for those who attended online. I got information from the organizers that actually around 150 have registered, and at this moment 76. And I also noticed that the participant who attended online coming from different places, different area in Indonesia, from Makassar, my colleague from Makassar, Kalimantan, Jogja, Medan, and also from Maluku. So thank you. Yeah, okay. Hopefully all of you are in a good shape, in good condition, healthy and happy. Okay, so because now we already 10 minutes past the the plan to start the presentation. So I would like to directly start the session, and also thank you for coming here for those who attended offline. So today seminar, in the next 1.5 hours, our colleague, our distinguished speakers, Dr. Robin Orthey will share his expertise and also his research, and hopefully he will also provide some practical insight for us, especially practitioner working in the field of forensic or legal psychology. So without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. Robin Orthey. Okay, so in terms of educational background, this is very interesting what I found from his CV. So he got his degree in psychology mostly from the Netherlands, because he got his bachelor degree, master degree, and also PhD degree from different universities in the Netherlands. He got his bachelor and master from bachelor from Radboud University Nijmegen with cum laude award, and then honors program also with cum laude. So how many times you got cum laude, Robin? Yeah. Honors program from Radboud University Nijmegen, and also master program M.Sc from Maastricht University, Psychology and Law. And then he furthered his education, PhD from Portsmouth University and Maastricht University, so it's double degree. Actually, Dr. Robin Orthey is a German legal psychologist, but currently working in Japan. And his research interests lie in the field of legal psychology, specifically in methods of detecting concealed crime knowledge. So he will introduce us the forced choice test, the concealed information test. And from a theoretical perspective, he wants to understand how examinees develop and execute counter strategies. So counter strategies, how to, let's say, defeat the tools, for example, lie detections or polygraph, isn't it, Robin? When faced with psychological tests in adverse situation. And in applied terms, he strived to evaluate the diagnostic accuracy of forensic tests and how to improve it. And he used a diverse set of methodologies. This is also interesting. We can ask him more about, because he applied more, let's say, advanced methodology. So, for example, cognitive measures to physiological measures of autonomic nervous system, for example, sweat, respiration, and heart rate, and also brain activity. He's familiar with applying, for example, EEG, yeah, and his passion actually in doing a lot of research is to bridge the gap between scientists and practitioner in legal psychology. So I think we could learn a lot of things from Robin that hopefully we can apply it in our works, yeah, as a researcher and also a practitioner in legal psychology. And I also noticed there are some participants are practitioners in terms of law enforcement officers, police. So hopefully, even though the speaker will share a lot of, let's say, research findings, and it will be also beneficial for you to apply it in your work setting. Okay, Dr. Robin Orthey, the screen and also the floors now is yours, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Is it okay on Zoom? Yes. Okay, Niles, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. All right, so Niall already said everything. In Japan, I first was a postdoc in a neuroscience laboratory in Kansai Gakuin, and then afterwards I moved to Aoyama Gakuin, where I did a more applied research. I will present the work of both projects later. And recently I joined a research laboratory at Fujitsu, but I'm also still a visiting researcher at Aoyama Gakuin. But so what is my talk about today? I want to show how some of the basic research designs that you learn in your undergraduate studies, how they can be used to solve practical problems. And specifically here, I want to talk about something which is called malingering. And specifically, I will introduce two malingering tests. So one is the forced choice test. This was my PhD research, or my PhD was mostly focused on that. And the concealed information test, which is a tool mostly used in Japan. So malingering, put simply, is when somebody simulates cognitive or psychological problems to gain financial benefits or to avoid punishment from the law. And here's one example. This is a soldier who, after he finished his term, he came back and he said that he has a lot of pain from his job. So he received disability benefits from the government. But at the same time, he completed triathlons and he climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. So he clearly faked these symptoms to gain benefits. So this is the first case. And then, sorry, right? Oh, because I used the mouse. Sorry. So here's another case. This is quite recent from Japan, where somebody murdered his wife and 5 children, set fire to the house. But then when the police came, he basically said, I have early onset dementia. I don't remember anything about the crime, so they couldn't question him. In this case, the court decided not to believe him, but this idea to make up like a memory problem to avoid punishment or reduce punishment is also malingering. So I think there are 3 reasons why we need to detect malingering. And the first one is it leads to financial damage. The soldier who basically stole the money is just flat out a crime. Second, and this maybe is even worse, it creates distrust for these programs. So I think the disability benefit is quite a good program, but if you see a case like this, people might wonder, why do we have this if it's so easy to cheat the system? And lastly, perpetrators might evade justice if they use psychological problems as a defense. Now, first, I want to introduce to you one of the first studies about the forced choice test. These authors are practitioners, and they had a case. A 27-year-old patient had symptoms of left-sided weakness, memory problems, and bilateral deafness. And that in itself is okay. But what is suspicious is when somebody who comes to you to be helped, if they don't really want to be helped, if they care more about receiving financial compensation. So if they say, yeah, just write me a paper that says I have these problems, so they can go to the insurance. So in this case, the authors decided to observe the patient for a few days in the clinic, and the first 2 symptoms just disappeared, but the deafness stayed. So they devised a test, which today is known as the forced choice test. And I want to show this here. Yeah, so this was conducted to check for deafness. And it's very simple. We have a lamp, and it lights up blue for 2 seconds and then red for 2 seconds. Now, at random, during one of the 2 intervals, we play a sound to the side where he says he's deaf. Afterwards, we just ask, okay, during the blue or the red trial, when was the sound played? And the person has to make a choice. That's the forced part. You must choose. If you don't know it, they tell you just guess. In this case, maybe the person says blue, which would be incorrect. This is considered one trial, and we would repeat this, in this case, 100 times. So how this test works is we calculate 36 times out of the 100 trials, the patient guessed the correct answer, and we can calculate the probability of this outcome to happen by chance alone. And as it turns out, this is very, very low. So ultimately, the authors conclude these mistakes must be deliberate. There must be a plan to create the impression that the symptoms, that this deafness exists, but by doing so, they avoided correct answers. And this is the general logic. I tell you, select the correct answer. If you don't know, guess. We have two equally probable choices. If you're innocent, you are actually guessing. We expect that your total score falls within chance performance. However, if you do know the truth, if you're not impaired, if you want to create the fake impression that you have these symptoms, traditionally, we expect that these people select incorrect answers on purpose, and this is what we use to detect malingered performance. So, okay, I'm so sorry. So just to illustrate this again, if we have, for example, 20 trials, we see here the probability distribution of the outcomes that you can get. Underperformance traditionally is defined as a test score that has a probability of 5% or lower. The number is simply chosen for tradition's sake, so the typical 5% in psychology. So a score in this case of 6 and lower would be considered underperformance. On the opposite side, it could be overperformance if you have more correct than expected by chance, and chance performance is somewhere in the middle. And traditionally, we expect malingerers to produce underperformance. Now, this is one of the first experimental studies on the forced choice test, and it shows some interesting pattern. First of all, a large proportion, so roughly 60% here, of malingerers actually underperform. They have very low, very extreme scores, and they're easy to detect. But what I care about is the remaining part. So there are some people who overperform and some people who produce chance performance. And I wanted to know why and what I can do about this. So what we see here is a combination of 3 of my studies. Now, just to explain this, so these are frequencies, so it's number of cases. And at the bottom, I'm sorry. So at the bottom, you don't see concrete numbers, but you can see it, okay. But negative to a positive number. And the reason is I have to standardize these scores because the tests, they have different length. So in the example before, 6 or less would be underperformance. But if your test is longer, this number changes. So here, everything is on a scale. What you have to imagine is on the left, negative means less likely than chance. On the right, positive, more likely than chance. And around 0, this is chance performance. So we can already see here that the distribution is quite skewed. And one of the things I did is I just asked people what they did. And based on their reports, I just formulated 3 different strategy levels that are based on the instructions. So if my instruction is select the correct answer, if you don't know, guess. Level 0, this is compliance. You do what the test says, and this should lead to overperformance. Now, I want to make clear here that I'm not sure if this is real in practice. I'm wondering if this is a artifact of the experiment where people might not be sure what to do. It occurs very rarely, so I'm not so concerned about this. Then we have avoidance. So the instructions tell me select the correct answer. So I just do the opposite. You select incorrect answers, and this leads to underperformance. And then a lot of students and participants, they report, well, it's strange if I just select the incorrect answers. So they realize this is odd. So they randomize between correct and incorrect answers, and this leads to chance performance. And indeed, if we look at the distribution color-coded by the strategy, we see what we expect. So these are overperformance, these are all underperformance, and the chance performance people also manage to be in there. Does this work now? Yeah, okay. So one of the major conclusions of my PhD is, first of all, the avoidance behavior is very strong. It's very intense. So the traditional 5% cutoff is not needed. We can use a much more conservative cutoff. I recommend 1% in my studies. And we still detect the same amount of people who produce underperformance. Secondly, I'm interested in new measures to basically detect intentional randomization. There are some behavioral ones, but they're not so interesting. So what's nicer to see is brain activity. So this is what I want to introduce today. And this is what I did in Japan in Kansai Gakuin. So when talking about brain activity, I used electroencephalography. Essentially, we are measuring the electrical activity of the gray matter of the brain, so the surface level activity. And usually in a laboratory, you wear a cap like this, you sit very still, you're not allowed to move. There are also mobile versions. So this is me in a field experiment. However, they still have some way to go, I think. So typically in the lab, you would use the ones on the left. And this is what EEG data looks like in the raw recording. Basically, you can't see anything. You have to go through a lot of steps in processing before you see any effects. And essentially what I'm looking at here is ERPs. ERPs are event-related potentials. So those are effects in the brain data specific to an event that are related to feedback processing. Because my thinking is, if you are a malingerer, you make mistakes on purpose in this kind of test. So I had the idea that feedback loses its function, or maybe it works differently. So I want to know if I can detect malingering by studying the feedback processes in the brain. And there's two I want to look at. One is the P300. This is maybe the most well-known event-related potential. And the other one is the feedback-related negativity. So the P300 is typically studied with the so-called oddball task. And this task looks like this. We have a sequence. In this case, it's a sequence of tones. For example, many tones with 1200 hertz. But occasionally in the sequence is a different one, an outlier, a strange tone. In this case, maybe 1000 hertz. The one that is different, we would call the target. The other ones we would call the standard or irrelevance. It depends on the researcher what term to use. And when we look at brain activity, this is what it looks like. So let's break it down. So the P300 is strongest in the parietal cortex. So that's the back side here. Sorry. This side is for the target. So that's the one that's different. And the standards are basically the ones that are common. The P300 occurs after 300 milliseconds and is strongest in the parietal cortex, so P300. This is essentially what we see for targets, a very high amplitude compared to standards, which only produce a small amplitude. Now, please note, in this plot, positive is up. But in EEG research, a lot of, or some effects are also negative. So in some cases, the plots are upside down, and this will be the case next. So the next one is the feedback-related negativity, which is studied with the gambling task. The gambling task is also quite simple. We have two boxes, and they both indicate a reward or loss. It's a risk factor. You can choose a high reward, high risk, or low reward, low risk. Then you make a random choice. And afterwards, the color here tells you if you win or lose. And for feedback-related negativity, so that's what I said. Please note, negative is up. We see that losing creates a more negative deflection here between 200 and 300 milliseconds compared to positive. So this one is a difference waveform. So alone, it doesn't mean anything, but you check the difference between loss and gain, or in my case, correct and incorrect. Yeah, so here is the basic overview of my study. I collected 18 students. This was during Corona times, so EEG experiments were quite hard to do at the time. We did the auditory forced choice test, the very first one that I introduced, but this time with EEG. We had a within subject design. Once people performed honestly, I gave them noise canceling ear protection so they couldn't hear the sound. And once I asked them to malinger. So they're asked to pretend to be deaf. And I gave them a warning. So I told them, okay, you should not only select incorrect answers, this will be suspicious. So all of these people in the end randomized between correct and incorrect answers, which is what I aim to detect here. So this is again the oddball task that we use, but additionally, after they make a choice, I provide them feedback. So in Japan, a cross means no or incorrect, and a circle would be correct. And while they receive the feedback, this is when I measure the brain activity and I look at the P300 and feedback-related negativity. Now, here we see the plot in the honest condition. So please note, negative is up, here's positive, and let's look at this part first. So the solid line is the incorrect answer, the dotted line here is the correct answer. And the feedback-related negativity is the difference between these two. So I have plotted this here. So this top line is the difference between these two. And we see there's a big difference in the time frame we would expect. Secondly, this one, positive, is the P300. It's very large, both for positive and negative. Yeah, so here feedback-related negativity, here P300. This is what I expect. So here people perform honestly, everything is all right. This is my control condition. But let's look at what the ERPs look like when you fake your performance. They completely collapse. So both FRN, very small, if any difference, and for P300, it's quite diminished. So if we compare these conditions, the differences are quite large. And the reason why I think so is if you make mistakes on purpose, feedback has no use anymore. You know in advance what the feedback is going to be. And secondly, if you chose the incorrect answer on purpose, you could also consider that you didn't make a mistake because you wanted to choose the incorrect answer on purpose. I can't say which one is correct, but I believe either one might be a possible explanation. In the end, for me, what matters is that it's diagnostic, that I can discriminate honest from malingered performance. And as I said, the effect was quite strong. Now, I've talked about the forced choice test mostly in clinical cases now. So this is about cognitive impairment, in this case deafness, but it can also be memory problem. But what for me is even more interesting is when the forced choice test is applied to crime memory. And Danny, he's a practitioner. He described 3 cases of criminals who are, of suspects who are suspected of a crime. But they say, I have amnesia, I don't remember anything about the case. So we can construct a forced choice test to check the validity of these amnesia claims. And essentially what we do is instead of having the red and blue light and checking for a sound, we would make questions about the crime. So for example, here, what color were the pants? One of the 2 answers is correct, the other one is incorrect. Both have to be plausible. And the instruction is the same. We tell the person, select the correct answer. If you don't know, guess. And what we see in these cases is the same pattern as for the other malingering cases. People tend to avoid the correct answers and over-select incorrect answers. And this is how the forced choice test can be used for crime memory. I should say that the forced choice test likes large test sizes. So 100 trials is great, but as you can imagine, to make these questions, we need to have evidence. We need to have factual information that we know is correct, that we know that the suspect remembers, and we have to make these questions, and it's quite difficult. So for my studies, I use test length of maybe 20 to 25 questions. In some cases, this is not possible if you don't have enough information. So that's a limitation of this test. In the Netherlands, the forced choice test is sometimes conducted. And if it does, it is usually by forensic experts. So university professors in the Netherlands, the people from Maastricht University have published a few cases. Danny is from the US and he's a practitioner, or only a practitioner, I think. Now, the next part I want to move to is physiological tools of deception detection. And this topic is, maybe a lot of you already have some knowledge about this, but please bear with me because I want to make a distinction here. So first of all, I will talk about the polygraph, but there is different types. Generally speaking, when people hear about the polygraph, they know it as the lie detection test used in the US. And typically it uses measures of sweat, heart rate, or respiration. But what's important to understand is that the polygraph, or that the polygraph test is not the machine, but the types of questions that you use. And this is a very important distinction because one method is, in my opinion, quite bad, and another one has scientific merit. And let me illustrate this here. So even though the same word is used, depending on the country, a different test is referred to. So we have in the US, where also the first polygraph was invented. Today, this test is known as the control question test, and the purpose is lie detection. So this kind of test is, did you murder your wife, yes or no? Have you ever lied to a policeman, yes or no? Stuff like that. On the other hand, we have Japan, where we use the concealed information test. This test was developed by scientists, and here the purpose is memory detection. I will focus on the latter part, but because there's often some ambiguity, I will just briefly touch on some key points about the CQT. So first of all, among scientists, generally, the CQT is not considered as good science. And in contrast, the CIT is well known, but has a good foundation, but it is unfortunately not known. If in practice you encounter the polygraph, it is almost always the control question test. So it is still used in the US, for example. Only Japan uses systematically the concealed information test. So here I want to introduce the report from the National Research Council in 2003. An independent group of scientists was asked to evaluate the validity and performance of the polygraph, of the control question test. And here are some of the three major criticisms they have about this test. First of all, there's no theoretical basis. It uses a differential response in essentially nervousness, so fear or arousal, but there's no explanation why this should work. Secondly, the evidence that is available is quite poor, and often even in single cases, it cannot be used to make decisions with the kind of support that is needed for a test with severe consequences. And lastly, the detection accuracy that proponents of this test report often is overestimated. So you will hear claims like this test has 90–95% accuracy rates. In the author's opinion and also my opinion, this is not valid, or this is not guaranteed. And you can say, okay, 2003, it has been a long time, but has anything changed? Well, no. So Iacono and Ben-Shakar, they have been critics of this test for quite a while. They looked after many years again, what are the new developments? Is there any change in quality, or the three criticisms I mentioned? But unfortunately not. So I do not consider this test very good. However, what I do want to introduce to you in more detail is the concealed information test. And again, here the purpose is we want to detect crime knowledge, memory of a crime. And the way we do this is we also use a multiple choice format. In this case, we have 5 answer alternatives. But here answers are presented one after another. For example, what was the murder weapon? And the answer alternatives are gun, hammer, knife. All have to make sense, of course. And you would get them one after another. What was the murder weapon? Was it a gun? You say no. Was it a knife? You say no, and so on. This is how this test looks like. And if you remember the oddball task, we have a sequence of stimuli, and one stimulus in the sequence is different, the oddball. The oddball produces a different response. Now, the CIT is essentially an applied oddball task. So if my question is, what was the murder weapon? I have 5 different answer alternatives. These are my stimuli. And let's look at what happens if you don't know anything. It could be any of these. So as I said, it's important that all answers must make sense. So if the correct answer is really clear, then it doesn't work. But if all are good answer alternatives, then we expect that essentially you produce the same response to every answer. However, if you do know the truth, then one is different from the rest. And if you recognize the correct answer, then we expect a differential response here. So the beauty of this test is that it only behaves like an oddball task for those who know the correct answer. And this is what we use essentially for detection. Now, let's look at the measures we can use. So here we have the P300. We have seen this before. So this is the brain activity. When we see the correct answer, the solid line here, we expect a larger P300 amplitude, while the incorrect answers produce a smaller P300 amplitude. Now, EEG, as I mentioned before, it's a quite expensive and tricky procedure, so it's not very practical in real life. So that's why the CIT examiners in Japan also use the measures of the autonomic nervous system. And the strongest one is skin conductance response, which essentially is sweat. The correct answer also elicits a larger sweat response compared to incorrect answers. Then we have heart rate. Heart rate decreases when the correct answer is presented compared to incorrect answers. And lastly, respiration. So when the correct answer is presented, respiration shortens as opposed to the incorrect answers. Here is an overview. So this was from a meta-analysis. And here we see the detection accuracy of the test. And please pay attention to these values. So this is essentially coherence D. And we see very large effect sizes. So this is quite unusual for psychology. So the support here is quite strong. And in practice, actually, a CIT examination always starts with the so-called card test. I have 5 playing cards, I shuffle them, you draw a card, you memorize the number, and I do one practice question with you. The idea here is to train you with the procedure because there should be no surprises. You should know how the test works, but also to check the equipment and to check how well you respond. So in some people, around 20%, the skin conductance response is not measurable. So of course, these people sweat, but we don't see a response. It's not clear why this is happening, but it's relatively common. So we just need to know if we should use this measure or not. But essentially, this is the card test. But there's a very nice thing. One of the major problems we have in psychology is we develop all these tests, we do the laboratory studies, but then people say, yeah, but does it work in real life? Because you don't know. You have suspects, you can't just do an experiment at the police station. Well, in Japan, forensic examiners, they actually have a background in psychology. And the nice thing about the card test is that it's there's nothing secret. We can use it as a control condition. So here is a study from Zaitsu. He was a Japanese police polygrapher, so using the CIT. And he compared the effectiveness of the card test in the field with real suspects and card tests conducted in the laboratory. And essentially what I want you to take from this graph is that in both cases, field and laboratory, we see essentially the same pattern. And why I think this is so important is it's one of the few cases where somebody can demonstrate that our laboratory-based designs have the same validity, comparable validity in practice. Unfortunately, often this is not the case. Or we don't know. Now, what I want to show you next is a real recording. So here I went with some of my students to a police station in Nara, and the examiner did the card test on one of my students. So here, skin conductance level and skin conductance response, both together make up sweat. Essentially, the top one is the slower changing level of sweat, and the other one, this is the stimulus-specific one, short-lived response. This is the one we look at. Then this one and this one is respiration, so 2 respiration belts here and here. And then we have a heart rate measured by ECG, and we compute heart rate, normalized pulse volume. And here on top, we see the numbers of the cards. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first line is always when the examiner says, was your card number 4? The second line is when the examinee says no. Now, all of these measures need some processing. The only exception is skin conductance response. We can see in the raw data usually the effect if it is there. In this case, for example, we see the largest response for number 6 here. Oh, and sometimes you notice the time might be longer. There can be many reasons for that. So, for example, if you move, it might affect your physiological reactivity, or maybe you, if you have something in your throat. So then we just wait. So this is 5 answers. This is 1 round. Usually 5 rounds are conducted, but here we only did 2. So here's the second round. And for example, for skin conductance, we also see a response here and here for number 6. So you might wonder, okay, why are you so confident that 6 is the correct one? Because we also see a larger response here. Now, one effect that we know of is the so-called novelty response. Just because we start this procedure, the first answer always has an elevated response. In this case, we needed to save a bit of time. So if there's 5 possible answers, the test actually features 6. And the first one is always, we always know that is incorrect. So we can ignore it for the analysis. But in this case, we just randomly place the numbers. So the fact that the first one here elicited a response would actually be ignored. Yeah, and this is how the real-life recording looks like. So in Japan, the CIT is a memory detection tool. It is not lie detection. And this is very important also if we think about the implications. There's at least 1 forensic examiner in each prefecture in the headquarters. And as I said, they have a background in psychology. Usually they do an undergraduate, sometimes a master's. Then they go to the police and they receive some additional training in psychophysiology. But they have this experimental background that you also have in psychology, and that underlies the oddball paradigm. And so in practice, it typically works like this. So first of all, we have the crime. Then the police gathers evidence and searches for suspects. If there's no evidence, we cannot conduct a CIT. If there's no suspect, we cannot conduct a CIT. Then the lead investigator has to decide if he wants a CIT examination or not. Then this is optional. Sometimes the police polygrapher goes to the crime scene to maybe check out some details, or he has to make different questions than maybe what the evidence gathering team looks for. So you think about what kind of information would somebody remember about the crime. So this might not be clear from the file. So sometimes they have to go to the crime scene and then think about what information they could ask for. Then the examination is conducted. It is voluntary, so people can refuse it. And lastly, the results of the examination are used by the lead investigator in the interview. So this procedure is a support for the interview. It's not itself used as evidence. Yeah, so in Japan, there are 2 uses of this test. The first use, that's basically everything I've explained so far about the CIT. This is confirmatory. So the question is, has the suspect this particular knowledge about the crime? And then the purpose is, for example, the investigator wants to interview the person and they want to use this test to show maybe that the suspect has been to the crime scene. So they devise a question about a piece of information that if you know this, it means you have been to the crime scene. This is the idea. But in my opinion, there's an even more interesting use, and this is for intelligence gathering. So here we make the assumption that our suspect is the perpetrator, or that our suspect has the knowledge we're looking for. But we don't know a fact, for example. So we don't know what the murder weapon was, or we don't know where the weapon is hidden, or something like that. It has to be something factual that you can ask. And here the purpose is to reveal this information. And essentially it works the same thing. So if our examinee is the suspect, it means they must have this knowledge. So the reverse of this test should be true. What we do is we don't know the truth, but we can make many guesses. So based on the evidence, we can come up with some ideas what would be the murder weapon or where could it be hidden. So we make many guesses, maybe more than 6, but it depends a bit on the length of the test. And the idea is if the correct answer is among the guesses, we should be able to identify it based on the response, if it is among them. Now, here is one example. This is one of the very early studies on this. Here people basically decided on a date to plan an attack. We present people with the different dates, and we see for the correct date in this case, a larger response. So this is only skin conductance response. In the laboratory, the searching CIT and the confirmatory CIT are basically the same, because we know for our experiment what the correct answer is, so there's no difference. It's essentially the same task, but with a different purpose when used in practice. Here, this one I thought was also very interesting. Here, the authors used groups. So we have 3 suspects. They decide on a country, a city, and a street to plan an attack. And we do like a searching mechanism. So we have a big list of countries that are possible. All 3 people are examined at the same time. 3 rounds. There's a decision rule that you can check the paper. It's a little bit complicated. But if they find a country that leads to a distinct response, then they go to that country and then think, okay, what cities could this attack happen? Again, make a searching question for cities. And again, after a city has been identified, they make one for the street. So for case of country, in 19 out of 20, the correct country was identified, and in one, no decision was reached. For the city, it goes down to 13 of 19, and ultimately 7 of 20, we arrive at the correct street. There are some incorrects, which something I want to stress why I like this test as an intelligence gathering tool. You don't make harsh decisions, right? You don't send somebody to prison for this, but you collect evidence, you search for something, and if a mistake is made, then you, well, search for something that's not there. So the consequence of a mistake is not so bad. And secondly, in case when you're innocent, we also see there's not a high rate of false positives, which is one of the major advantages of this test. Now, I'm interested in this second application of the CIT, so the searching CIT, but you can imagine it is quite difficult in some cases to formulate a good answer. So, for example, if the weapon is thrown away on a highway, so how do you make clear points where it could be? Or sometimes there are too many answer alternatives. So usually 6 answers are used and they are repeated 5 times. This leads, a typical examination takes 3 to 4 hours in Japan. So you have to be economical. You can't just ask all possible answer alternatives. Or what if we look for location? So this is what I'm interested in, and in Aoyama Gakuin in Japan, I conducted some studies about this. So let's have a look. So I had 47 students, and in my mock crime, they basically learn about a train station in Tokyo. The idea is, again, this would be the target of an attack or something, and they have to hide this information. So in this case here, it would be Shimbashi Station, and they see these pictures. Then what we have 2 routes. two train routes in Tokyo, Ginza line. This is where the target location is located, or where the train passes the target location. And the Hansumon line. This is where the train does not pass through the target location. And yeah, so here we see yellow. This is the Ginza line. The marked spot is the target location. And this is the filler route, target absent. There the target location is not present. Of course, I counterbalance this. So for some students, Otemachi here would be the correct answer, and the other would be the incorrect route. So the way the version works that I used is I don't have distinct answers. So I wouldn't ask the specific train station names. Instead, I have a dot that moves from one end to the other slowly along the line. And the idea is that maybe in anticipation or after the correct answer, the correct location, I can see a spike or elevation in activity. So I was interested in the 35-second interval around the target location. So again, here we see this. The dot moves from start to end. The target location, the target location is represented here. And then we have 5-second blocks. So 3 before, 5 seconds when the target location has been passed, and then 3 afterwards. And I compare this, so the target route where the target is present and the other route where there was no target. Essentially what we see here is that this is for skin conductance response, I saw a larger activity in the periods before, but not during and not after. So my idea here is that in anticipation of the target location, we can identify possibly the target location by an elevated response before you pass it. So it's in anticipation of the target. Now, I should note here that this only works on a group level, and this is another important point. So often in forensic psychology, in experiments, you find good findings, but it just works on your group level. On your average, you find a difference, but it has to work for individual cases. This is very crucial for me, and for the first choice test, for example, it works quite well. For the normal CIT also, but the one I just presented to you now, this does not yet work on individual level. So I can show you this nice plot on a group level, but for a single case, this does not yet work, okay? Yeah. So in summary, I talked about malingering, which is about simulating psychological and cognitive deficits for money or to avoid punishment. I showed to you the first choice test, originally a clinical test, but that can also be used to detect claims of crime memory. And the concealed information test, a psychophysiological test, an applied oddball paradigm. Yeah.
Okay, that's the presentation from Dr. Robin Orthey. Thank you very much, Robin. Give applause for Robin to appreciate his talk. So yes, this is more like experimental research, yeah, which is maybe it's not like what you call like we are not familiar maybe with this experiment, but you have introduced us, so thank you very much. And also, so now we have question and answer sessions. Feel free to raise questions. You can just what you call unmute yourself for those who attend online and raise questions, or you can type it. And also for those who attend offline, you just raise your hands and ask him any questions. Maybe you're wondering how to put into practice this research findings, this experimental research. Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions? Yeah, this Feiren. Yeah. Please introduce yourself a little bit, then go ahead.
Hi. Hi. My name's Farron. I just graduated from Columbia University in New York, and I used to intern at the Criminal Justice Agency. So I was really concerned about like how we could actually use this CIT test in real life cases. So you said that in Japan, a test would take like 4 hours, but how do you think this can be applied in cities where there could be like 700 arrests a day, like in New York? Like a 4 hour test just like won't cut it in that case. So how would you suggest that be applied? Thanks.
Hello? Sorry. Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So some of my recent work is also about how to make it shorter. So on the one hand, I would say recent research focuses on making it more efficient. There are also other methods which are faster. On the other hand, I would maybe not use it for every case. So as I said, it's the bigger problem is it's difficult to construct. So you have to make good questions. So it takes, an examiner who's trained to do it. So, well, I mean, if you can, then you should use it. But otherwise, I would prioritize. In Japan, most crimes occur in few places. So those headquarters have more examiners, and some they have examinations all day throughout the whole year. And in some prefectures, they only rarely conduct a CIT. Since only Japan is the only country that on a systematic level applies this test, I don't know how operationally feasible it in some other countries is. I do know that some practitioners choose to also use the CIT. So countries that have polygraph examiners that use the control question test, they also use the CIT for its value. But the limitation here is that it's harder to do and you can't always use it. If you don't have evidence, you just can't use the test. Thank you.
Thanks. No.
Yeah. Thank you, Feiren, for the questions. And Robin, we have 3 participants who type their questions on the chat box from Merinta, Melania, and also Ignatius. Feel free if you would like to unmute yourself and ask Robin directly. Merinta? Okay. Do you want to ask directly or maybe we can, I can help you. Hello, Merinta. Are you there? Yeah. Okay. So actually Merinta is a master student in psychology from Surabaya University in East Java province. And she's designing his thesis research for final project about ACE variable. So ACE, it goes to adverse childhood experience. That could be one of the factors contributing to malingering behavior. And she's planning to use experimental method to determine how non-medical malingering can be detected. And her question is it possible to use FCT, forced choice test, as I not only want to see how malingering can be predicted, but also want to prove that ACE factors can be one of the factors contributing to malingering behavior. What is your response?
Sir, can I read the question?
Yeah, sure.
I quite understand it.
No.
It's which one? So is the question if you can use the forced choice test to
detect malingering?
Yeah. Okay, let me put it like this. So today, or originally, the forced choice test was known as the so-called symptom validity test, SVT. However, this term does no longer refer to the forced choice test, today the forced choice test in malingering research is known as a performance validity test. The difference is symptom validity tests checks subjective symptoms. So you say you have pain, you say you have depression, stuff like that. Sort of subjective. While performance validity tests, they check impairment. You have damaged hearing. You have memory problem. I must admit, I don't know anything about adverse childhood experience. So I'm going to be cautious and say for now, no.
For example, the A's, let's say the participants claim that during childhood he was abused severely by their parents. For example, he was neglected by their parents. That's his report.
Okay. Yeah. No, the forced choice test cannot check veracity of reports. It's just performance. So at the time of examination, do you have this impairment? That's really the question. And for crime memory, for crime memory, it is about a specific event. So do you have memory of the specific event? So ACE sounds like a more like big period. So I'm not sure that this is the appropriate test for that.
Merita, do you feel satisfied with the answer or you have a follow-up question? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you for the answer. Okay. Seems that you feel satisfied. And from Melania. So actually, Robin, Melania wondering when this task started to be used in Japan and which stage of investigations they use. And also, do you think this task could be applied to victims? Yeah. And how, let's say, there's a problems when let's say, the participants have intellectual disability.
Okay, let's do one by one.
Yeah.
The first one again, please.
When did it start? When did it start?
Yeah. So Japan.
In Japan.
Let me just briefly explain the history a bit. The control question test was developed by a policeman in the US. And then at some point, so the story goes, a psychologist wanted to evaluate how good the test works, but they didn't know what they were doing. Like they didn't know the procedure. So they came up with an experiment, which ultimately resulted in the CIT. So by chance, they developed another method that, in my opinion, is much more effective. So in Japan, they started to use both tests at the same time. And at some point over 30 years ago, I believe, someone in the decision-making sphere decided we will no longer use CQT. The scientific evidence that the CQT is not as accurate as some people claim is not new. So this is already known for quite a while. So they just decided, okay, we only use CIT, and that was it. So they started, I think, over 50 or maybe more, so more than 50 years ago, I think. But in recent years, only CIT. Originally, they started to use both. Okay, first question. So this is what I showed earlier. So the investigator decides if they have a suspect that they want to interview, they make a decision if they want a CIT examination to be conducted, because maybe they want some support to place the suspect at the crime scene. And then in the interview, they do their interview. Yeah. So it's up to the investigator, but usually it's before the interview, because also you realize in the interview, if I ask you questions about the crime, maybe you gain some information about it. So the moment you know this information, you can no longer take this test, because this information then is no longer privileged to the perpetrator and the police. But if I ask you in the interview maybe about, like, do you recognize this knife? Right? Now you know, okay, the knife must be the murder weapon. So you cannot take the test afterwards anymore. So it has to be before the interview.
And about what action be applied for victim?
Yeah. So actually before the interview, before the CIT examination, we would just ask people, do you know anything about the crime? And they just say no. Okay, we will ask you questions about the crime. What was the murder weapon? Where is it hidden? And so on. Do you know the correct answer? They say no. We even show them the answer alternatives before, like the weapon. Is it a gun, knife, hammer, and so on? Does any answer stick out to you? They say no. So if you're a victim, yeah, the tests detect memory, just if you have the knowledge or not. I don't know, maybe you have a good reason why you don't want to reveal this knowledge. That I cannot say. But maybe I'm naive. But maybe as a victim, you would just reveal, like tell the information you have. Yeah, of course, if it's not the case, so if they say no, 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 I don't know anything, okay, then you might fail the test. But also, I don't think a CIT examination would be ordered or would be requested for a victim, I think. And there was one.
Who have intellectual disability or do you think?
I don't know. I don't know if it is used in this case. Yeah, so I'll just be safe and say, don't know yet.
It sounds kind of simple, right?
So to my knowledge, there's no research about this. The biological signals should be the same, but also maybe you are moving a lot, which can create noise. But I cannot give you a satisfying answer. I'm sorry.
Then the next question from Ignatius, you can read it. 100 item test, does the same type or is a mixture? Question.
Okay, so I think the 100 items, it's still one test. But because we are working with a statistical probability, it becomes safer if you have more trials. So ideally, I want to have as many trials as possible. But the conclusion, it's still one test. We decide on a false positive rate that we accept beforehand. So traditionally 5%, which means that there's a 5% chance that an innocent person, through random guessing, produces an underperformance score. Now, I'm not a practitioner, but I know some people who do more research in malingering. And I think in general, the rule is you need to fail at least 2 malingering tests before you would accuse somebody of malingering. So this is one of the tests you would do alongside them. So yeah, and you need, ideally you want as many trials as possible, but there's one conclusion for all trials together, not on a single trial.
Then the tunnel vision bias.
So the effect we could see in skin conductance response, it is usually very clear. Actually, in general, if the test works, the result is quite clear. It is made by expert judgment. So in the end, the examiner compares the strength to the correct answer relative to the incorrect answers for all different physiological measures. Yes, tunnel vision, I think, can affect this choice. It is, however, so if it works, it's quite clear. The bigger problem is that often, or not often, but for some suspects or perpetrators, the test might not be as strong. Maybe the crime happened a long time ago, so memory decays. Or maybe they committed many crimes at the same time, so it's not clear anymore if the detail they were asked about is about the event. Or maybe they just forgot it. So yeah, so the decision, there can be some influence, but I think not not so much towards false positives as opposed to false negatives, for example. Though I think bias are always a consideration when a human expert is used. That also applies to expert witnesses and me and everyone. Yeah, my studies were conducted in Japan and all students were Japanese. Most of the CIT research is conducted in Western institutions, usually in the Netherlands, US. Also, a lot of research is coming from Israel. In the Netherlands, from my personal experience, it is not very multi-ethnic. I cannot comment on the other ones. The biological signal, I think, is the same for everyone. Like I don't see a difference in Japan as in Europe. For forced choice test, I don't know if there are differences in guessing behavior. I have not examined this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we still have time, so I open the question and session again. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I want to ask, I introduce myself. I'm Dini, Dwi Prihandini. I'm founder of Cleric Levy Institute. We are based in Molucas. I'm the woman who giving service for humanity in 19 of outer island in Molucas. When I go to there, I know some cases of suicide, but in my opinion, if we want to ask them, we should ask to some interpret, because in Molucas, for your info, there are 62 languages, and in outer island, more difficult language. So is it possible to use this or interpreter, or how in your opinion? Thank you.
Yeah. So for the CIT, I'll do it separately per test. For the CIT, you preview the questions. Before you take the test, you already get the questions and you are asked if you already know the answer. If for some reason you do, it would, for example, be removed. So you could use an interpreter to make sure that the question is correct. I suppose it presents a challenge in making sure that all answers are equally plausible. So the CIT is only used systematically in Japan. So actually, they don't need interpreters. So this has not yet been examined. How to make a question ultimately is up to the examiner. So they decide my selection of these 5 answers all makes sense. In research, there are some ways to check this. So we make the questions, we give it to like 20 students and ask everyone select the answer you think is most likely correct. And if some answers stick out, then we have to change the test. But in practice, it relies on the expert who makes the questions. So to go back to the interpreters, in principle, you can have an interpreter translate all the questions, translate all the procedure. Like there's no haste, there's no deception. We want to know people to know exactly what's going to happen. They should not be nervous. They should be calm and relaxed. If some information gets lost in translation, yeah, this can be a problem. Perhaps the translator can help to make sure that the translation is good, but there's no research to my knowledge about this. But so let's say in principle, it should be possible, but bearing in mind that translation adds another source of error. For the forced choice test, it's the same thing. You could prepare the questions in advance. Again, the instruction is select the correct answer. If you don't know, guess. I suppose that this could result in some misunderstanding. It's a bit counterintuitive. I don't know of any studies that check misunderstanding through interpreters here. So I'll say it's a possible additional source of error. In principle, though, the materials can be created in advance in conjunction with an interpreter. And in theory, it should work. That's what I would say. This was your first question. There was another one. Right, thank you.
Thank you for the questions, Ibu Dini, and also Robin for the answer. Any questions from the audience online? Otherwise, I will have some questions, Robin, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, someone raised hands. Yes, go ahead. From Mbak Norida from Pusat PPA is the Center for Children and Women. He's also one of the member and board of the APSIFOR. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mas Nael. So thank you, Robin, for your presentation. So my name is Nori, and I'm currently working as a psychologist in Center for Women and Child Protection of Jakarta. And in Indonesia, currently, psychological report is one of the important evidence for sexual abuse cases, especially for legal purpose. While this is important to make sure that the perspective of the victims is well recorded and delivered to the police officer. It's also quite a lot of police officers currently, they well educated enough to know about malingering, and mostly they ask about whatever the victims are actually malingered, their symptoms. And if we talk about the complexity of the victims of sexual abuse, well, they're also probably they show symptoms of like traumas, and then about the stress during the legal process, and also about the like probably external intensive about the legal process. I think it's very important for us as a psychologist to like doing some like assessment and reporting about malingering in our psychological report. So with your research and expertise, especially in what you talked before, and do you have any like suggestion, especially for us as a practitioner, how to improve our psychological assessment and report, especially for the victims of sexual abuse cases? I think it's only like I really want to know, what do you think about this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm flattered, but I think practitioners, you know much more than me in a lot of cases. So about sexual abuse, I'm not sure that either of the tests I have presented to you today are useful, because it is just about confirming the memory for a specific event. And also for the CIT specifically, I see it more as a support tool for the investigation. Yeah, for the purposes that I have described, I think these tests are good. They have a scientific foundation. I don't know enough about sexual assault and abuse to really give you advice. I think you are more the expert than me in this matter. Usually what I do is I see tests that exist, and I want to study how they work, what people do, and how to improve these tests. So I can speak to you at length about these two tests and the applications. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced they would contribute to the assessment of sexual abuse. So I'm rather be careful here. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Robin.
Maybe I would like to follow up her questions, Robin, because yes, nowadays the psychological report, as Norida mentions, I mean, psychologists are asked frequently to involve, and doing the psychological assessment. And most of us, sometimes we focusing on the, let's say, the impact of the event for the victims, and then the victims reported the symptoms, and then okay, we accept it as it is, But then because this is in a legal arena, so has a stake, so then we have to evaluate the symptom, right? Symptom validity. And I think I interested in what you have explained about the performance validity test, right? Because, for example, the victim claimed that he became super afraid and she refused to go to school, or she refused to involve in their daily activities, right? And yeah, okay, that's the report. But then, as a psychologist, we cannot follow the client or the assessee 24 hours, right? Maybe we can, So what we have now for the symptom validity test, we also, for example, got insight from some international speakers about the malingering detection using, for example, some tools like SIMS. Yeah. So we ask like what you call bizarre symptoms, whether he or she endorse it or not. If he endorsed too much on bizarre items, then we might suspicious about the malingering. Yeah. And about the performance, I think, do you have maybe some, ideas about it? Yeah.
Like in what way? Like,
yeah. Do you think is it possible to like design or to create like a performance validity task for the victim who claimed that he experienced a lot of suffered because of the abuse? Yeah.
So the
or what we should do in order to design or create those performance validity tasks.
Yeah, so the key aspect of the forced choice test is that we check performance right now. Right? Can you do it right now? Are you deaf right now? Is your memory impaired right now at the time of examination? Or for crime memory about a specific event in the past. So my background does not cover the clinical side, so I don't really know what are some real symptoms maybe people report. If you think you can turn this into a task, I don't know if somebody says I cannot go near something, and you can make a task where you would have two choices like that. But I think this is a difficult question to answer spontaneously, because the implication and impact can be quite severe. So I don't want to say things that
so
are
at
not
least
supported.
you get like the practical questions from us who work in the field, and you can think about and in your design for your future experiment. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Robin. Is there any additional questions? Okay. If not, I have okay, there's a question. Stressing but not detecting lie, but detecting memory. Could you please explain more? Maybe kind of clue that it's become more about lie than memory.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, the reason is why I stress this is that the polygraph in the US, the control question test, it's specifically a lie detection test, right? It's, did you murder your wife? Yes or no? And if you fail it, they say, oh, it means you murdered your wife. So there's the big criticism that none of this is valid. So this is on the one hand, and then the CIT, it detects memory. So if you fail this test, it doesn't mean you're the perpetrator. Maybe your brother or sister committed the crime and told you about it. Now you have this knowledge. If the police does the test with you, you will also fail the test. So it doesn't imply guilt. It just means you have this knowledge. You might even have a good reason why you have this knowledge. You just have to explain yourself and convince the investigator later. So in terms of implication, what it means and what the test does for the criminal investigation, that's why I think it's very important to stress that it is not lie detection. I'm personally not convinced there are effective lie detection methods.
And Robin, for information, unfortunately, this kind of polygraph is being used recently in Indonesia, especially for highly reputational cases who consider as a complex case. And there's a judge, let's say, verdict, and one of the main consideration is the result of that polygraph, unfortunately. So And maybe you can, your presentations should be heard by the policymaker or the leader in our law enforcement office. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, about that. So I referenced two papers specifically. One, the National Research Council 2003.
Okay.
It's an over 80-page document that goes in intense detail about the validity and the problems of this test. So this should, in my opinion, is quite convincing. And then there's the 2019 update, which reviews the studies that have come afterwards. Personally, I also agree with the authors that the conclusions from the original report have not changed. The limitations have not been addressed. And so please don't take my word for it, but check the references.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Please send us, and then Abi will direct it to the Board of Crime in Indonesia. Okay. Yes. I think, is there any additional questions? If not, I'm wondering, Robin, can I ask you something? Because recently we, as a, let's say, forensic psychologist, we got referral from the police for what we call as a cold case. You know, actually the crime happened sometimes ago. It could be years, but then because of something, there's a kind of lead or extra new information. Then the police reopen the case. And I'm thinking about, I think your ideas about the forced choice test or CIT, we can apply it to work with the cold case, because we have a lot of evidence, or a lot of, let's say, what you call fact or details from the crime scene, and also there's some potential suspect, let's say. But then the question is, do you think, how about, because you combine the CIT and FCT with kind of physiological tools, right? Psychological measurement. However, we don't have the tools. Yes, we have it, but only in headquarters of the crime board in the police office, let's say, But we as a practitioner, we don't have the tools, but do you think it's still applicable? Let's say we take out that physiological measurement, but then we use it, and there's maybe some indicators, whether, for example, observing their nonverbal or the way they response or the time reaction maybe. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Yeah, so first let me start that, to my knowledge, there's no workable nonverbal solution, but then let me go in more detail. So first of all, the forced choice test, strictly speaking, doesn't require any equipment. You can do it with a paper and pencil. I recommend to do it on a computer. So I've only presented the surface, but you can also measure some additional things that are easy to do with a computer. So a simple programming task can do it. So that's basically free. The CIT, so I've presented the autonomic nervous system and the brain data. It can also be used with an eye tracker, which is also very expensive, I know. I also don't have it. But aside from that, it can be used with response times. And possibly there are other indices that are cheaper in the future, but I don't want to talk about things that are not certain yet. So it might. Yeah, so for the CIT, it requires at the moment equipment. The equipment used by the police is quite sophisticated in Japan and at research universities as well. As you've seen in the meta-analysis, the effects are very, very strong. I'm not saying that this is it, but maybe cheaper devices can also work, but it has not been demonstrated yet. So because the effect is so strong, maybe you don't need the high grades equipment that's super expensive. But still, I think for the CIT, it will still take a while until there's many affordable solutions. But I want to touch on one thing about cold cases. Please remember, even if we have a lot of facts, we check for memory, right? So if we ask someone about details, I don't know, maybe somebody broke in a house through back door and we know they knocked over a plant, and we can ask what item fell over, they might not remember it. So it would have to be maybe key information. And of course, maybe information gets leaked over newspapers, so we cannot use that either. I'm not saying that it can't be used, but we have to be conscious about the fact that, of course, the memory changes and they might not remember this information.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, this is the last session for question and answer. Anyone would like to take the opportunity to ask Robin directly? Okay, it seems that everybody, I assume, satisfied with your explanation. Yeah. Even though, yes, to be honest, your, let's say, methods in doing research is, how to put it, like quite complex, because we now, in doing research in psychology, normally we use like a self-report, or some researcher also doing experimental studies, with less sophisticated tools or machine. Okay. But then in real life, especially our colleagues from who work in as a practitioners, they receive difficult questions from the law enforcement and also dealing with difficult cases. So the insight from, let's say, more basic research also beneficial for us. So thank you very much, Robin. Highly appreciate your willingness to share your knowledge. And hopefully you also, we stay in touch. And then if you find any result from your experimental lab that you think relevant and could be applicable, could be applied in our practices as a forensic or legal psychologist, feel free to let us know and we can arrange online meeting, even though you're in Japan or in Germany. Okay,
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for all the participants of these seminars. Highly appreciate for your coming and for your attendance. And is there any announcement from the committee? No announcement. So just follow the, let's say, maybe social media of Faculty of Psychology Universitas Indonesia, and to the event also in cooperation with the APSIFOR, Asosiasi Psikologi Forensik Indonesia APSIFOR. So you can also follow the social media of APSIFOR in order to know maybe in the future there's more sharing sessions like this from the expert in the field, and which scientist meeting practitioner is highly relevant and beneficial for us in order to improve forensic psychology in Indonesia. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Hopefully you have a wonderful day today and have a nice weekend. Tomorrow we will celebrate our Independence Day. Thank you.